I recently came across a podcast where a couple of the people were talking about trauma, and one of the men was saying that he believes that the word trauma is used too much in society nowadays, that it's thrown around when it really shouldn't be, and that unless you experienced something like abuse, you weren't really entitled to call it trauma. And it felt very much at odds with what Dr Gabor Mate would say. If any of you are familiar with his work, it just felt like a very ignorant and a narrow way to view something that a lot of people experience and endure throughout their lives. If you haven't heard of Gabor Mate, he is a doctor and an author. He writes and speaks extensively on the topic of trauma, and he believes that trauma is a contributor to a wide range of health issues, including cancers and ADHD. When I come across one of his videos, I will always stop and watch and listen, even if for a little bit. I find his words immensely comforting and I feel very seen. So Gabor Mate says that there are, of course, what he calls capital T traumas, or capital T traumatic events like being abused as a child. There is no doubt that that would cause trauma. But then there are also what he calls small t traumas, like a child's needs not being met. You can't say if someone has experienced trauma or not, because trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So what that means is that the same thing happens to two different people and it may affect them very differently. You know, you have two different people with two different personalities, two different temperaments, resilience, etc. And so you can't look at a person and say whether or not that person has experienced trauma. That is for them to tell you what they've experienced on the inside. So how Gabor Mate defines trauma is that it's an invisible force and it shapes how we live and love and make sense of the world. I just wanted to bring this up today because that podcast that I referred to earlier, I can see how it can cause a person who is currently experiencing pain and hurt from past traumas and is feeling vulnerable, or someone who maybe hasn't processed all of that, maybe is young, just how it could be dismissive of how you're actually feeling on the inside. It can cause someone perhaps to feel, well, I wasn't abused, I didn't have parents who hit me, and I never saw violence, etc. And so therefore I'm not allowed to say that I experienced trauma. Well, I think if you're in pain, if you're hurting, you are allowed and you should recognize it as that. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That even if what your experience is today is different to someone else who went through the same circumstances as you and they might not call it trauma, you're allowed to if that's what you're experiencing on the inside. And I really believe that to heal, we must acknowledge that we are in pain and that we need to heal. And I think to dismiss your own pain, to say that it's nothing or that it really shouldn't be anything, that I must be making something out of nothing, I should just get over it, etc. I don't think is very helpful, and I think is in fact quite dangerous. So I just wanted to quickly share that. You're allowed to feel what you feel and you're allowed to call it trauma if that's what you've experienced on the inside. So I thought I'd quickly share. I'll see you tomorrow.